Hi, and welcome to another episode of Let's Get Vaccinated, where each week we deliver a healthy shot of science and facts. So we do two things on this show. We answer your questions about vaccines and the pandemic, and we all learn how to effectively communicate science, because sharing science is how we keep our communities safe. So in case you don't know me, my name is Lucky Tran. I'm a biologist and science communicator based at Columbia University in New York, and I'm the managing director for March for Science. So today we'll be answering all your questions about kids and vaccines. Please do leave your questions in the chat and we'll try to address them on the show today. And to help us today, we have a couple of experts. Please welcome to the show Dr. Eric Yancey, who is a pediatrician who has been practicing in Indianapolis for over 40 years and is an advisory board member for our partners Hood Medicine Initiative. Welcome, Dr. Yancey. How are you today?
Just fine, just fine. Happy to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited to have you join us today. And also joining us today is Dr. Eric Ball, who is a primary care pediatrician in Orange County, California, and a member of the amazing This Is Our Shot team. How are you doing today, Dr. Ball?
Doing great, Lucky. Thanks so much for having us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you both for joining us and helping us answer questions on this topic that really we get the most questions about these days. And I think, so there's some recent good news on this topic, and that is that since the mRNA vaccines were authorized for teens 12 and up around 3 weeks ago, there's been a big bump in vaccinations, which previously were steadily declining. And as we can see, it's been driven by young kids. And as we all know how convincing kids can be, I also think probably likely they help their parents get the shot too. So I think that's really exciting. And there's been a lot of interest in vaccines for kids right now. So I think before we jump into the audience questions, I'd love to hear from you both about what kind of conversations you've been having with families at the moment around vaccines. Has there been a lot of excitement? Have there been concerns? What sort of questions you've been getting from your communities? Maybe Dr. Yancey, you could start.
Sure. Actually, mine has been there's very few in the middle. I was hoping for more parents who wanted to say, I'm interested in this, and can you tell me more about it? But I've been a little disappointed that the opinions have been so polarized. I have some parents, it's like, how soon can I get this? I want to get him over there the first day. And it's like, okay, let me give you the numbers to call. Let's get them in there. And then the others, because now it's routine that I ask the parents about the vaccination for their children. And There are others who will actually decline before I can really finish the sentence. And a very few in the middle. And so I then always go into, tell me what you know. Tell me you answered that very quickly. So tell me what you know. And it usually reverts back to, always reverts back to what they've read online through some basically non-scientific site, or what they heard from a neighbor or someone else. And we spend some time trying to kind of, diffuse that. But many of them they kind of dig their heels in. So I've had either end of the spectrum.
That's interesting. Dr. Ball, what have you been seeing with your community?
Yeah, we're seeing very similar things that Dr. Yancey is seeing. I could also speak from personal experience. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old at home. And my 13-year-old felt terrible because my 16-year-old was fully vaccinated a month ago, 2 months ago. And when it came out, it was approved 3 p.m. California time. We were at CVS 6 p.m. that night getting her first shot. So, and I think that was the common experience with our friends and our, my physician colleagues. But like Dr. Yancey said, we've had a lot of long conversations with families. I ask every single patient now 12 and older in my office if they've gotten their vaccine already. And it often leads to some very good conversations about it. And I think we have had some good uptake here in California.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. We have a lot of great audience questions. Thank you for asking them. I think it's really important to have these conversations. So please keep throwing them in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them today. So I think that's a good point, hearing your experiences, to maybe talk about the obvious question is, how can we have these conversations? So Carrie asks, how can we encourage my kids' friends to get vaccinated. So a big purpose of this show is really to learn how to do effective health and science communication. So as pediatricians, what do you think the most effective techniques are for people who might, I do take it there is some polarization, and you get some people who are really hard to budge, but there's a lot of people in the sort of wait and see sandwich category. What would be the best technique for talking to people like that to encourage them to get vaccinated? Maybe Dr. Ball, you could start on that.
And I think with kids especially, there's more of those middle ground, wait and see kind of people rather than the polarized people. I think of the adults, most of the people who have wanted to get their shot have already gotten it. A lot of the people who haven't might never get their vaccine. But for the kids, there's a lot of people who have a lot of questions. I'm a big practice what you preach kind of guy. I think the best way to encourage your friends to get your kids vaccinated is get your own kids vaccinated, get vaccinated. Everyone in my office wears these little buttons that said, I got my COVID-19 vaccine. And that starts a conversation with our patients. And I always tell my patients that I would never do anything for their kids differently than I do for mine. So, sharing my own stories on social media with my patients, I find has been very helpful.
And I found the same thing. I mean, I had a lot of posts up where I, got mine. My kids are much older now, and so they've gotten all theirs, but they're adults. They're not in that category anymore. But I find that if I can just open that conversation and really go right into having them tell me what the hesitation is. And many times I can just diffuse that hesitation right there. One of the, and I'm sure you will be getting into that, but for some of the parents of the young ladies, they had this concern about about fertility, because there was this post a while back that talked about something related to fertility. It's one of those things where this comes up and then it's completely off skew as to what it is, but it just spreads like wildfire. So when I can actually diffuse that for them, many of them will go, oh, okay. And so I think it's really knowledge. By and large, of course, in years of doing this, and I'm sure that that all the pediatricians would agree, parents want what's best for their children. By and large, to a fault, they want what's best for their children. It's just up to me to show them why what we're talking about is both safe and effective. And usually that way we can kind of get more of them to come over.
One of the great things about being a pediatrician is most of these kids who are coming in as adolescents, we've had a relationship with them for 10, 15 years. And these families really trust us, and we've helped, essentially help them raise their children. And so they have this trusted voice who they can come to. And I think that's important. There's so much garbage and nonsense and noise out there that it's nice that we could provide some clarity to our patients. So another thing I'd say is, ask your friends' parents to talk to their pediatrician, talk to a trusted medical person who knows the science behind this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I know This Is Our Shot has been working on that basis, right? That family doctors particularly are trusted members of the community, right? And from social science surveys, continually family doctors are among the most trusted professions, there is out there. And so that's an effective point. And generally trusted members of the community to spread that message is really important. I know, like in my day job, I teach science communication. That's my number one thing that I teach, is that the messenger is important. I'd be interested to hear from you. What do you think about kids? Like you were just talking about your daughter, Eric, and Dr. Ball. And I know so far, a lot of the surveys show that a lot of people who were in that middle group of wait and see, what really pushed them off the sidelines was seeing an uncle or a friend or someone else, talk to them and say, I did it because, I want to protect my family, I want to protect my community, and sort of share the reasons they did it. Do you think parents have a role in sort of teaching their kids how to have these conversations? And do you think that will, how kids are, right? Like sharing things on social media and in great communication these days. Do you think there's a role for kids in this as well?
Yeah. Oh, my daughter, she and her friends are sharing their little vaccine cards and kind of bragging about who's going to get it first. And I think
love
they're
that.
big. They're great. And I think honestly, like they know science. Like these teenagers, they know about this stuff very well. They also see the repercussions of COVID, right? I mean, they've suffered almost more than anyone. I mean, granted, they generally do better when they get sick, but because of COVID, they've missed school. My kids have been doing Zoom school for a year. And so this is their avenue out, is to protect our community and to protect them. And so I think that they have a good knowledge. A lot of them have a really good knowledge of science, and they know what's right for them, and they're very savvy on social media. So I'm happy that my own kids are ambassadors for this as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I just happened to see one of the questions over there. They're going by pretty quickly. I'm trying to keep an eye on some of them. But one of them was, if I think I'm going to paraphrase here, if children are not that severely affected, why do we need to vaccinate them? Okay, and I think that's an excellent question. And the reason is, one of the reasons is that not all children are as fortunate to have mild cases. Every year we have a number of children who do get, I mean, not year, but as the results come out, there are a number of children who do get severe cases, and some who actually die. But short of just the death numbers, there's all sorts of potential long-term complications, that some of which we may not even know. We know this particular illness can cause a significant, inflammation of small blood vessels, the vasculitis. Well, what does that do to the? We're now starting to see some cognitive changes, from brain development. We're now looking at things related to the heart. We're now looking at things related to the kidneys. And so, even though your child may not end up in the ICU on a ventilator, it doesn't mean that they got by completely unscathed. And so therefore, the reason to vaccinate children is because there could be long-term consequences to this particular infectious virus that we are still learning about. And back in decades and decades ago, there was a drug that was given that later caused a lot of birth defects and whatever, and of course people didn't know. They finally figured out what it was and the whole bit. But so when you can prevent something that can have consequences, that's always a good thing. I still tend to say that because another reason that one of the concerns is that because you can't really see the effects of what COVID may be doing right now, there are many parents who don't fear it. In 1955, you really didn't have to do a lot of convincing of parents about the polio vaccine, because they would walk past these long wards of children in these iron lungs who couldn't breathe. And they saw children almost every day at the stores or wherever in these braces and crutches and the whole bit. And their thing was, I don't want my child to end up like that. So there wasn't a lot of convincing on that. It's like, wow, this is what we're talking about here. But I think that the problem with some of the situations with COVID is that you can't really see the physical evidence of what's going on right then, but it doesn't mean it's not occurring.
There's a good reason why all of my partners who have kids in this age range got their vaccine the first day. There's a reason why most of us applied for our kids to be in clinical trials. Like, we saw the brunt of it. I personally saw some terrible things with patients. I know with one of my friend's kids almost died, and I didn't want to roll the dice with my own kids. I wanted to choose a safe and effective vaccine.
That makes sense. And yeah, sometimes vaccines are a victim of their own success, right? We sort of don't, there is a generation that doesn't remember all these terrible diseases. And so this is why these conversations are important, and we keep having them with our communities. Linda, so this is a question that everyone is asking right now if you have a kid under 12, right? When can kids ages 2 to 11 get the vaccine? I've got 2 grandsons and I need to know. Thanks. So I think Dr. Fauci said today, maybe fall, probably by the end of the year, right? Is that a realistic schedule? Do you both of you think that's sort of realistic schedule?
Word on the street is that I think the trials are supposed to be wrapping up in September-ish, I think. So I think by the fall to the end of the year is probably your best bet for it. The problem with these trials for little kids, which is a little different, is you not only have to see if they work, but you have to get an effective dose, because little kids aren't just small adults, so you can't just like half the dose. So what they're doing is kind of 2 different things. One is they're giving different age groups different doses and seeing which ones are effective, getting antibody levels, and then they're also seeing that they're effective. So there's actually an additional step for these little kid trials that they didn't have to do for the older children.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of enrolling, do you both know how people can enroll their kids in a clinical trial? What's sort of the best resource to do that?
I tried for my daughter. They were all full. They filled up really
That makes
quickly.
sense.
And I mean, I'm not sure if there's any that are still open for enrollment. There's a tremendous number of people who are trying to get into these clinical trials. And I
Yeah,
think they're all
absolutely.
ongoing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be hard. My best advice is I work at a university hospital, so just look on their websites and, the pediatrics department. If they're open, they'll probably be advertised there, but it shouldn't be hard to find them if they are open. But yeah, they are very popular, which is great.
And I went through just the Moderna and Pfizer websites, which had links to where you can go.
Great. Okay.
Previous points. I just saw a post that this is very distressing question, or statement more or less, and someone just posted that their 9-year-old nephew had succumbed and had died of COVID a while back, and she said it was just very quick. And I think that's another thing that really makes me want to push and inform, educate, or whatever you want to call it, about this, because of the unpredictability of it. There's certain diseases that are going to have a pretty reasonably logical course to it. You say, okay, you get let's take bacterial meningitis. You get meningitis. You come in a certain way. We're gonna give you these antibiotics. We're gonna, and it's likely you could hearing loss. You could get some other things, but it may have in the old days. I call it old days. It had a pretty predictable course to it. You kind of knew what was going to happen. This is by day 3 or 4, we're going to be done with the fever. Then we're going to get. This thing is different. It really, we don't know who will be. We know who's high risk and higher risk, but we don't know who will be severely affected and who will die from it. And we've certainly had some very healthy young people who just succumbed to it. Some of them fairly rapidly, and they didn't have underlying diseases. I'm thinking of a OBGYN resident early in the course of it. She didn't have any underlying conditions, just a nice, healthy, not overweight woman who just got it and died. And so, we don't really, we know it's bad. It can be very bad, but we know some people are asymptomatic, but we still don't have a way yet of figuring out who's going to get a bad case and who's not. So our thing is the best case, the scenario is let's just put it down, keep everybody from getting it, and we don't have to make that decision.
Exactly. And we are so sorry to hear about your loss, Lisa. Thank you for joining us today. And this is why we have shows like this, really, because it's important to have these conversations and do our best to protect our communities. And we do that by getting the vaccine out and getting our communities vaccinated. So really appreciate everyone joining the show today and participating in this important discussion. And appreciate both of you for joining us today. In terms of, I know for adult side effects was a big question, right? In terms of why people were waiting and seeing to get the vaccine. So the question from Monica is, do children get side effects with the same severity as adults?
Yeah, I mean, the vaccine, the side effect profile is pretty similar. I don't know if I'd use the word severity. I mean, it's not a horrible vaccine. So about 25% of people will get fevers or feel kind of crappy the next day, fatigue, feel achy. When I got mine almost 6 months ago now, I felt a little bit kind of off the next day. My 16-year-old son had a fever and kind of missed the day of school. And then my 13-year-old daughter got her second shot yesterday. She was totally fine today and went to school. So, but when you look at the side effect profile or the effect profile of getting COVID, right, you're talking about best case scenario feeling like that for 2 weeks. So even if you have kind of a bad side effect, like 24 hours of feeling bad, it's way better than COVID.
Absolutely. Now, I was one of the fortunate ones. In fact, I had to wonder after a few weeks whether or not I had gotten the placebo or not. I hope actually, I didn't really have. I had a tiny bit of soreness on my arm, but I didn't have anything. I mean, I didn't get tired. Of course, I worked pretty hard all the time, so I might have gotten tired and didn't notice it, but I didn't. I didn't seem to have anything. And my wife was a little tired after she got hers, but again, it's nowhere close to what you run into. I think that the other thing that happens is that sometimes people don't really realize the horrific nature of the social component of having this. You're going to be seriously ill by yourself. Okay. And if you imagine what the frightening nature of I mean, because visitation is severely limited. I mean, and you get in the ICU and these things are scary. Think about an 8 or 9-year-old who has to endure this mostly by themselves, okay? Because there's not going to be a lot of family around all the time. And I think one of the things that really made me push it, made me line up first, is that the area, so I mean, the surrounding the illness itself, there's just a lot of social things that are just a real problem. The other thing is, I wanted to see if we could push to get as many children vaccinated as possible, because the children really do need their social component. They need to get back to each other. They need to get back in their sporting events and whatever, but that needs to be as safe as possible. And it's always in the back of my mind, okay, once we throw all these children back together, somebody's going to get sick. So the best way is to protect them, protect large numbers of them. And then we can decrease that vulnerability. And they can get back to safely getting together. Children are social, so are adults.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, we have a couple of other questions. Actually, I like this comment from Sarah, and the facts from the vaccine is just your immune system practicing the fire drill and fighting COVID, right? That's how I explain it to others. Yeah, as a science communicator, I love that sort of practice drill scenario. I think it's a great way of explaining a very complex thing, which your immune system is, but basically that's a great way to explain it. I love that. So here's one that a lot of people have been talking about, myocarditis, right? What is the latest about heart issues with teens and mRNA? I know people have heard about this in the news, and maybe you could shed a bit more light on what's happening with this issue.
Yeah, so there's been some reports of some teenagers who have had the mRNA vaccine, particularly men or older boys who have had very mild cases of myocarditis. Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart. Usually, almost always very mild, goes away by itself. They've had some chest pain, maybe some shortness of breath. There was a study that came out of Israel who has done a great job of vaccinating their population recently. And I think out of 5 million doses, they had 500 cases. So what's that? It's very low. It's like 1 in 100,000, something like that. Just for comparison, the rate of myocarditis in a study in late May in a journal here, 1,600 college athletes, 37 had myocarditis who had COVID. Right. So your rate of myocarditis or heart inflammation is actually quite high with COVID. It's one of the main things that it affects teenagers especially. So this is still theoretical. We haven't really figured out whether this was actually a cause and effect, because people get myocarditis kind of routinely. We see it in our office. So it's unsure whether it's related to the vaccine. Even if it is, it's exceedingly rare, it's exceedingly mild, and it's self-limited. And the difference between this and the Johnson & Johnson blood clot thing is that was the reason that they took that off the market for a short time, is that was severe. Some people died from those blood clots. This, if it is associated, is very mild. And when you weigh the risks and benefits, it's much less risky than taking your shot with COVID.
And then just to add on to that, myocarditis, and I'm sure you'd probably agree with this, is probably one of the more underdiagnosed things that we come up with, because a child because we don't really look for it. Okay, it's kind of like a kid gets the flu and he stays home for a few days and whatever, and then he kind of doesn't feel good he or she doesn't feel good for like a week or two, and it's like, okay, now I'm recovering from the flu. If we really did the studies to look for myocarditis, we'd probably find it a lot more often, just due to regular old routine viruses that you pick up. But as was mentioned earlier, self-limited, mild cases, they're back to sports and whatever, no problem. So we kind of underdiagnosed it in the general population long before the COVID vaccine came out. And so, and whether or not it's a time-related thing, a causative thing, kind of hard to say, but we do know that the inflammation caused by the actual COVID infections, that's a worse deal.
Yeah, the heart issues for COVID have been the real deal. They've been pretty serious. So the American Academy of Pediatrics actually recommends that teenagers who have, except for the mildest cases of COVID, we have to cardiac clear them before they go back to sports, because there's been cases of kids having heart attacks and having inflammation of the heart after getting COVID cases. So in my practice, at least, anyone over 12 who had COVID, we clear them to make sure they're safe to go back to sports.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that is really illuminating and helpful, thinking about the risk benefit, really, which is really important to do. Dr. Yancey, I just wanted to put up some fan mail for you. Sherry says, my favorite pediatrician, my son and grandson's daughter. We love Dr. Yancey.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Someone drop in the comments some love for Dr. Ball too, and I'll bring it up if you just happen to be his patient. All right, let's get on to more questions. I know, so with as I was speaking before, families with young children are in a sort of tricky position in some ways, right? Because some of the family might be vaccinated, the adults, the older kids, and the younger kids are not quite there yet. And it'll likely be this way in the summer, maybe for the start of school, it sounds like as well. And so I think there's a lot of questions on how to navigate that. How do we enjoy our summers, when the rest of the world seems, well, not the world, but certain parts of the United States seems to be moving on. How do families navigate risk during this time? So, we'll go through a few questions like this. One of these are from Caitlin, is what is the risk of bringing unvaccinated toddlers around a group of vaccinated family members?
Let me just throw. I'll just kick it off. You go ahead and take it after that. I was thinking about, you said a risk of bringing unvaccinated toddlers around vaccinated family members. Okay, and just qualitatively, I think that risk would be pretty low. Okay, I think that's a pretty low risk. So far as large groups of unvaccinated people all together inside, well, the risk goes up on that. And it's hard to say exactly numerically what the risk would be, but we do know the virus has to have somewhere to go. We're starting to corner it. Okay, we're starting to kind of like, okay, it's like the old crime shows, the police shows. Come on out with your hands up. We're starting to corner it. Okay, so now if you could just animate it and think of it, if folks could just think of it in terms of this evil person, he's got to find somewhere to go now. Okay, and so he's running around the people and the doors are locked. They got vaccinated. He can't get in. So this opportunistic crook has got to find somebody else to actually get into, because keep in mind, the virus can't live in, they're the ultimate, parasite. They can't live on their own. They got to have a host. Okay. And so they can't come in with a host that's protected. So they got to find somebody who's not. So the best place to find somebody who's not is a big, tight indoor group of people who they probably could get it from. Then they can find new places to be. And I think that, so those are going to be higher risk. Certainly, toddlers and around some fully vaccinated adults, I'd find that's a very low risk at all.
I love that analogy. And yeah, the other thing is, I think the criminals are getting smarter in this case as well, or more resourceful, right, with variants, right? So those are more transmissible with fewer people. And for those who are unvaccinated, it's a higher risk right now. I think that doesn't get emphasized enough, which is why we're working so hard to work on the science and get younger people vaccinated, and working to get the vaccine out to different communities as quick as possible, because it's really important. What about going back to school? I know this is, as we were saying, this is a big thing, because it seems like it won't quite be there yet for younger children when school starts, in fall. So there'll be a period where parents are going to be worried about this. So, Kelly asks, what evidence is there of transmission amongst unvaccinated young children, right? Particularly in school environments. What is school going to look like for them when they start again in fall? Because a lot of places are going to start to go in person, and it depends on your location, etc. But maybe some advice for parents on navigating this?
Yeah, I think schools in the fall, it depends on how old you are. Like high schools might be very different than elementary schools, because the majority of high school students can or will be vaccinated. So for example, my son's high school has already announced for next year, they're not legally allowed to require vaccinations, but if you're not vaccinated, you have to wear a mask and you have to get a COVID test every 2 weeks. So it's strongly encouraged to get vaccinated. I think for the younger kids who are too young to get vaccinated, they're still going to be in masks. They probably still should be in masks. I think masks were extremely effective this year. A lot of schools where I am, they had pretty much full-time school, but in masks, socially distanced to some degree. And it was helpful. We had very few outbreaks at school. We had kids get COVID, but it was almost always from like grandma's house at Thanksgiving with 30 people eating inside. It wasn't like there was an outbreak in Mrs. Johnson's third grade class. So the masks really helped. And you can see that the masks helped because we stopped seeing kids who had the flu and ear infections and all these other things. So like we basically didn't have a cold season this year because of the masks. And so I think until the young kids can be vaccinated and we know that they're protected and it still has the possibility of circulating in these schools, the little kids will probably still be in masks this fall.
You know, I can't say that any better. I love that. I'm just a mask person. Call me Zorro or whoever else, but I just love masks, because one thing that variants can't do. I mean, variants are no more effective against a mask than against anything else. It's like they still get to this mask and there's nowhere to go. And the other thing I've found is that I have found very few children of my younger children who minded the mask. Okay, they didn't care. You know, they come in and they got the little mask on and they're cute and whatever, and they're sitting there and it's like, now, and then I'll get ready to look at the mouth. Okay, pull it down. But it seemed to be more of a thing. In many cases, the parents who had the biggest problem with it than the children. The children did fine with it. But the masks are effective against all the variants. And so I would say that, yes, I think that when you get rid of those mandates, well, one of the barometers of viral spread, you're right, is the colds and RSV and stuff like that. No cold season. I mean, so this is how the stuff spreads. The kids wore masks, and I would say nobody got sick. You know, it didn't get sick. And so I think that until there can be widespread effective immunization of the children, the mask policy is still one that I think is very necessary.
We also rely on herd immunity for people who can't be vaccinated. So people who can't be vaccinated either for medical reasons or, in this case, kids, because it's not approved for kids. So every adult who doesn't get vaccinated is forcing kids to wear masks one day longer. Because if every single adult in these United States got vaccinated, that'd be like, 80% of people be vaccinated. We'd get herd immunity. Maybe the kids can go to school without masks. But as long as we're lingering around like 50% or whatever, the virus is still going to circulate.
I think that's a super great point. And this is why we're working so hard to, vaccinate, not just for ourselves, to protect our communities, and so we can do things and return to normal as quick as possible. So I think that's really important. And in terms of, wearing masks, I know from the perspective of a science advocacy organization, we were disappointed in how politicized it was, because it really is a measure that we can take to protect others, right? And so I know in many places it's not mandated anymore, but if you're in a situation where you're unsure and you have people who are unvaccinated, who are immunocompromised, etc., you might want to consider taking extra precautions, which means wearing a mask in those scenarios. So I think that's really important. And I think also talking to your school, getting involved with the school decisions, having these conversations is a healthy thing to do from an advocacy perspective, because I think it's fair to ask that, our schools are protecting, our children, and so we need to have these conversations out there in the open and, work together on this. It's really important. So what about summer holidays, actually, in terms of what people can do on summer holidays? I know we're still worried, we're coming out of our shells, is it safe to do things like, if we have kids who are unvaccinated, can they play in the park without a mask at the moment? And what other things can we do in terms of that? Maybe you're both thinking about your summer holidays, and Dr. Bohr, maybe with your kids, what are you thinking about, how you're handling summer? I guess you're all vaccinated now, so that might be a different question, but maybe what's the best advice for people with young kids on how to enjoy their summer holidays?
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things is in the summer, lots of things are outside. And I tend to think that pretty much things that are outside are pretty safe, unless you're like all on top of each other. But doing things out, going to the beach or whatever is completely safe. There's actually a lot of evidence that flying, as long as you're wearing a mask, has been relatively safe. There haven't been a lot of outbreaks on flights. I've flown, since I've been vaccinated, but I've flown and I felt pretty safe on my flights. No, I think it's okay to you should plan on having a summer holiday. I think unless something changes, and as long as the adults are vaccinated and you use common precautions, the same precautions you would use at home. So wearing masks when you're inside, for example, is important. I like this rule of 3 that I've been following, which is if you have 2 of the following 3 conditions, you're safe. So outdoors, distanced, and masked. So if you're outside, you're not around anyone, you probably don't need to wear a mask. But if you're inside, then you probably should wear a mask. So if that makes sense. So you want to always have 2 of those 3. So outdoors, distanced, masked. And I've been following that with my kids, and it seems to be pretty effective.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the summers, hopefully the summer will be a time where some of the psychological things we've been going through actually start to decrease some. I'm dating myself here, but years ago there was a Broadway production of play. They made a movie out of it, but the movie wasn't as good. It was called The Wiz, okay, and The Wiz on Broadway was just fantastic. But there was one particular song, and it was right after the Wicked Witch was dead. Can you feel a brand new day? And it was everybody looking around. So I'm hoping that this summer, brings us kind of in some ways a brand new day, being outside, being whatever. But we can make that a better brand new day the more people we get vaccinated. And so I think that there will be we've seen a tremendous increase in the amount of anxiety and the amount of depression, the amount of all kinds of behavioral things related to children. And so I think it's just time to get rid of this thing. And the best way to do that is with a safe and effective vaccine.
Great. Thank you for that. And we're going to jump into some more questions to do with the vaccine itself. So one is from Jamie, who do we have any idea what sort of immunity babies who have been breastfed by those who've had the vaccine have?
Well, let me start off, and then I'll throw my little 2 cents in, and we'll go from there. If we're looking at transmission of the virus and how it does, there's certain receptors, respiratory tract receptors and things like that, that'll pick up this virus and actually assimilate it in the whole bit. So there will certainly be some degree of antibodies present in breast milk, but you're drinking those. You're drinking those. They're going to the respiratory tract. Some will be deactivated in the stomach. They'll probably be passed out in the stool. So we still recommend that mothers who have active cases who are breastfeeding actively breastfeed with a mask on, because it's the respiratory situation that we're most concerned about. So for us, from a placental transfer, yes, there are babies who are born with antibodies that were acquired from the placenta, both after vaccination of pregnant mothers as well as after COVID infections. But I wouldn't trust a level of immunity from just breastfeeding alone, because you're at a different site, and that is absolutely no way to try to protect the baby. All kinds of benefits to breastfeeding. Prevention of COVID is not one of them.
Yeah, the best way to protect a baby is to vaccinate all the people who are around the baby. Babies aren't, going to the park by themselves and hanging out with other kids. So they're completely at the mercy of everyone around them. So you vaccinate everyone around them, they won't get sick.
Right. It's what we did with the pertussis vaccine. We saw that pertussis vaccine was wearing off, so we said, okay, all young people, let's go ahead and get a booster to pertussis vaccine, and that's how we protect the babies from whooping cough.
Absolutely. So Kim has a question about reproductive health. So she has 2 young daughters who want to know about the research about the effects on reproductive health. And I know people have been hearing things about COVID and periods, right, affecting periods, and the vaccine affecting periods. I wonder if you could sort of share some knowledge on that.
Sure. I'll just hit this one. But anyway, somebody put in their post or whatever a while back that one of the proteins that it can be on the surface of the placenta, resembles in some ways the spike protein that's on the surface of that's on the virus. So then this leap was made. Well, if you make an antibody and you cause your body to make an antibody to the spike protein, and the spike protein has some areas that look like a protein that's on the placenta, then therefore you may be making a vaccine that gives you an antibody to the placenta, and you'll then eat your own placenta, and you can't carry the baby. So this tremendously long leap was put out there, and it absolutely doesn't hold water. Absolutely doesn't hold water. But this particular protein, they said, had some resemblances to the spike protein, and this leap was made that maybe one will do that. It crossed with the other, not so. And there's no fertility problems or anything with the vaccine. But we do know if you get COVID while you're pregnant, things can go south real bad. So
this is a conversation I have 10 times a day. And so three things to think about it. One is it's kind of ridiculous from a science perspective, like Eric was saying. So it doesn't really make any sense. It's also an old anti-vaxxer trope. When the HPV vaccine came out 15, 20 years ago, we heard the same thing. It's like they got to get some new things. Number 2 is there were a lot of courageous women who got in clinical trials, who got vaccinated while they were pregnant, before they were pregnant. So there are many, many, many people in the world who have had the COVID vaccine and had babies and everything was just fine. So we know from these people that it's okay. And third, and probably most important, is if you think about how the COVID vaccine is made. So the virus, or the SARS-CoV virus, is basically like a ball of fat with some RNA inside, and the RNA codes for 29 different proteins that make more viruses. The vaccines are a little ball of fat with the RNA that makes one of those proteins, right? That makes the spike protein. So everything in that vaccine is also in the virus. So if the vaccine made you sterile, then the virus should make you sterile. And 1/3 of the world should be sterile right now. And that didn't happen. So basically, anything that the vaccine is going to do, anyway, it's just foolish. It doesn't make any sense, and it's safe. Sorry.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So, Marin, has there been any issues with the vaccine reinitiating MIS, which is multi-inflammatory syndrome in children and kids who have already had it? And I remember this was something that crept up early in COVID, that people were seeing MIS, right? So wondering if there's any updates on that research, particularly in regards to the vaccines in this context.
So current CDC guidance is that if you had MIS-C, that you wait until all of your symptoms are better, your heart is recovered, everything is good, and a minimum of 90 days has passed, and then consider vaccination. There's a lot of evidence that the immunity you get after getting sick with COVID wanes over time, and you're usually good for a minimum of 3 months. So the CDC does recommend that people who've had MIS-C get vaccinated after a 3-month waiting period, and there hasn't been evidence that I know of it restarting the inflammation. So it's a good idea to do. My MIS-C patients, and I have quite a few of them, the ones who are old enough have all been vaccinated again.
Great. Sarah Ann, this is probably a question that pertains also to adults, but I know people who are immunocompromised, in some way have been asking, so what's the response? Is the vaccine still, effective in fighting the virus for anyone who's immunocompromised? I guess it depends, right, on sort of what sort of form of immunocompromised you are. And is there anything particular with kids in this instance that you've been seeing or seen the research on?
There was a kind of depressing study which came out a few weeks ago, which looked at transplant patients. Granted, I think it was only like 20 transplant patients who had a pretty minimal response to the vaccine. So they actually didn't have a robust response. So they were, theoretically still susceptible if they got exposed to the COVID virus. I'm not sure how sick they would have gotten, whether it would have been a little bit less. But, I feel the same way about COVID as everything else for immunocompromised patients, is that you really, really rely on herd immunity. So making sure their community is vaccinated. I have, just an example, I have a patient who had a heart transplant several years ago, and at the beginning of every school year, the mom goes back to school night and tells all the other parents, like, my kid had a heart transplant, her immune system is down, and I would pray that you would give your kids a flu shot this year to protect my kid, because her health relies on your health. If your kid is sick, maybe don't send them to school this year, because I don't want to get my daughter sick, because it could be worse for her. So we really rely on community immunity for those kind of patients.
Right. If there's no place to catch it from, you can't catch it. But like I said, with the immunocompromised, I was reading the same kind of things, that it's hard to stimulate the immunity in an immune system that doesn't work. And so they are dependent on the care and concern of those around them to say, I'm going to protect somebody else. I think that, unfortunately, early on, I think that was one of the major messages with the mask, that wear the mask for someone else. And I was saddened to get some of the comments from individuals who kind of said, well, everybody for himself. And I think it's tough if that becomes a widespread, every person for himself type of community mindset, because then some of the more vulnerable will be in peril because folks didn't take the steps they should. So you're right. There's one reason to get it for yourself, but certainly the other reason is to get it for somebody else.
Great. And we should probably wrap it up soon, but is there anything that we haven't covered right today so far with regards to vaccines and kids that you both think should be mentioned?
We as pediatricians, vaccines is all we do, right? So we've been answering kind of questions about vaccine safety for as long as there's been vaccines, and so I feel that this is all coming to a head, and we're getting all we've been preparing for this for a long time. With regards to the COVID vaccine, what I hope everyone realizes that this is an amazing vaccine. It is incredibly effective. It is incredibly safe. It's better than almost every other vaccine we have.
Absolutely.
And the fact that we went from, the country being shut down and, in the winter time, people dying in the hundreds of thousands, to us now talking about, do I go to Hawaii or do I go to Florida for my vacation with my family, is amazing. And we did this in less than a year. And our science and our doctors and all the people involved with this, it's really incredible. It's one of the greatest things that humanity has ever done. And I'm really thankful that I have my life back and my family has our life back because of this vaccine. And that's the best way I can sell it, is that it is a miracle of science.
Right. I just want to throw something in I agree with 100% of everything you just said, but I want to throw one other thing in. The best vaccine we can come up with is one that you actually get. Okay. They don't do much good in the refrigerator. But on the other hand, I think that I want to talk to all my teachers, all my parents, everybody else out there. Within the coming years, we're going to have to put some emphasis on teaching children how to know what's the truth, how to know what to believe, because there's going to be another pandemic coming. Okay. And at some point, they're going to have to rely on how do we get through this by getting good information, learning how to digest good information, and learning how to discern what's good information versus bad information. And I think that's going to be every bit as important of any vaccine we develop, because we can develop a miracle vaccine, but if half the people don't take it, it still won't do its job. So I think we really have to concentrate in the grade schools on this is how you evaluate good information.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. As someone who works in science communication, I think evaluating information is very, very important. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today and sharing your expertise with us. Before we let you both go, could you each please tell us about the amazing work that your orgs are doing and how people can support your work? Dr. Yancey, maybe you could go first with Hood Medicine Initiative.
Yeah, I'm with one of the recent additions to Hood Medicine. Okay, and it's a nonprofit organization that has a collective of scientists, of physicians, of other individuals interested in forwarding true scientific concepts and getting it out to the people. And Anisi Hudson, PhD, has done a tremendous job with that. I'm just happy to be on board with that. So yeah, tune in. It's going to be science@hoodmedicine.org. That's the email, or www.hoodmedicine.org. And yeah, just join us. See if you can get some good information. They are a great organization. I'm just happy to be affiliated with them.
Awesome.
And I'm here representing This Is Our Shot, which is kind of a grassroots organization, which started with just a few people, a few family medicine doctors who were trying to get the word out about COVID vaccines and COVID communication, and it spread to a big grassroots organization throughout the country with healthcare providers and others who are looking to educate people, to teach them best ways to communicate about COVID vaccine and about the safety and efficacy of that.
All right. Thank you both. And that's all we have for today, everyone. So please keep having those vaccine conversations with your circles. It's so important that we all hear from people we trust. And by sharing knowledge, we all help our communities keep safe. Thank you for watching today, and have everyone. Bye.
Good night.